You're going to love this. Coming up, two future Rock and Roll Hall of Famers from different legendary bands were talking shop one day. One, a guitarist, was showing the other, a singer-bassist, his band's brand new song, and he was really excited about it. He said, "This is the loudest, dirtiest, rockiest song ever." This singer-bassist took his words as a challenge. He went back to his band immediately and said, "We got to get loud and crazy and move the sound meter as far into the red as it'll go." The band took the challenge, so much so that the drummer played as hard as he could for 8 hours straight to get it right. By the time he was done, his fingers were bleeding all over. The song was named after a kiddie ride, and in the end, the band may have accidentally invented heavy metal. I mean, it's debatable, but in the end, the song blew everyone away. But then the kiddie ride song was stolen by a maniac. Great story coming up. It's a scorcher on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. You know, if you've ever speculated about the clues in the Paul is dead rumors, you're gonna dig this channel. Make sure to subscribe below right now. Click the bell so that you never miss out on our Music History Daily. And for even more content and behind the scenes footage, check us out on Patreon. The link for that is in the description. Make sure to take a look at our Vintage Years collection merch. You can do that right up here. So long before he was knighted by the Queen of England, Paul McCartney was casually reading a magazine article about Pete Townshend, and a comment from the Birdman in that feature really struck him. At that moment, Townshend was quoted as lauding the Who's freshly recorded I Can See for Miles as the loudest, dirtiest, rockiest song ever. Paul McCartney loved Townshend's description of his song, and the next time he went to the studio to work with the other three members of the Fab Four, he challenged the guys that they should push themselves to see just how loud and raucous they could get. The Beatles tossed aside the love songs, the psychedelic Mindbender, and the catchy little pop ditties. And they concentrated solely on moving the needle on the sound meter as far in the red as it could go to create Helter Skelter. Maka wasn't in awe of the Who's I Can See for Miles like its composer was. He heard the song as a straight ahead and sophisticated. For Helter Skelter, McCartney wanted nothing but noise. A song that screamed vocally and instrumentally. In some ways, the track became an angry counterpunch to critics who accused Paul of writing only sentimental ballads and referring to him as the soppy Beatle. While searching for lyrical inspiration, McCartney focused on a cone-shaped slide at the Royal Norfolk show near Easton, Norfolk, England. It was called Helter Skelter. It was a spiraling amusement fixture that Paul and his friends used to enjoy sliding down when they were kids. Now, Paul envisioned the Helter Skelter slide as a symbol of the oscillating highs and lows of life. Sometimes you climb to the top, and sometimes you get knocked back down to the bottom. 1 minute you're feeling euphoric, and the next you're feeling miserable. When I get to the bottom, I go back to the top of the slide where I stop and I turn and I go for a ride. I go back to the top of the slide where I stop and I turn and I go for a ride. Till I get to the bottom and I see you again. McCartney also had the rise and the fall of the Roman Empire in his head when he wrote Helter Skelter. It was the fall, the demise of a once dominant people. So as the composition developed, Paul's lyrics took on a suggestive tone with the ride spinning into a metaphor of the clash between the fantasy and the reality of adolescent desire. Well, do you, don't you want me to make you? I'm coming down fast, but don't let me break you. Tell me, tell me, tell me your answer. You may be a lover, but you ain't no dancer. So to create the noise for Helter Skelter, the band became enthralled with the sound distortion they could produce with the brilliant engineers at Abbey Road Studios. The recording of Helter Skelter, it was brutal and had the seemingly endless sessions becoming what Paul McCartney called a feat of endurance. The track was recorded several times during the sessions for the revered White Album. Now, as we further break down this amazing song, I want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. Make sure that you check out the newest designs. They have so many at Zenni.com today to raise your style up a few notches. All you do is you choose your frames, you put in your prescription, your address, and they ship them right to your door. It's really amazing. Check it out at Zenni.com. So during the session on July 18, 1968, the Beatles completed take 3 of the song that lasted 27 minutes and 11 seconds that was much different from the final version included on the album. About 2 months later, Abbey Road engineer Chris Thomas returned to the studio after a brief vacation, and he found a note on his desk from producer George Martin that he was now going to take a holiday of his own. On September 9th, Thomas timidly approached Paul McCartney and he explained the change in personnel. Paul and the band immediately voiced their skepticism about Thomas's ability to take the reins from George Martin, but they gradually rolled with it. The first session with Thomas at the helm was one for the memory books. Ringo Starr recalled that the session on September 9th was especially spirited, with George Harrison, who was supposed to be the quiet Beatles, setting fire to an ashtray and running around the studio with the flaming tray above his head, doing what Ringo referred to as an Arthur Brown impersonation. Now, Arthur Brown, he was known for his provocative onstage performance art. Brown shocked audiences with theatrics that included high-pitched banshee screams, extreme face paint, and burning helmets. Helter Skelter was born from the same kind of madness and hysterics. The Beatles ended up doing 18 takes of Helter Skelter from 7 p.m. to nearly 3 a.m. the next morning, with each take lasting approximately 5 minutes each. On the 18th take, Ringo reached his breaking point physically. For hours, Ringo had been playing the drums so forcefully, the constant friction between the wooden sticks in his fingers caused his hands to become severely blistered and bloody. The pain impelled Ringo to yell out, "I got blisters on my fingers." Ringo's painful declaration, of course, was left in the recording and ended up being the jolting climax of Helter Skelter. I got blisters on my fingers! And so it was, the 21st take overall, that was the magic version that made it on the White Album. The final arrangement for Helter Skelter manifested McCartney's original concept of one shifting disposition. Around 3 minutes and 40 seconds in, the song completely fades out, then gradually fades back in, fades partially, then fades back abruptly with 3 cymbal crashes and a barely audible, "How's that?" from John Lennon, just before Ringo's powerful outcry. Now, the following day, which was September 10th, 1968, Thomas and the crew put the finishing touches on the recording by adding overdubs that included a frenzied lead guitar part by George Harrison. There was a trumpet segment played by Mal Evans. A piano blast from Paul McCartney, and a mouth sax invented by John Lennon blowing through a saxophone mouthpiece. Like all the songs by the Beatles, Helter Skelter, it was credited as a Lennon-McCartney composition, but in a 1980 interview shortly before his death, John Lennon acknowledged that the track was completely Paul McCartney's. Helter Skelter was one of the cuts on the Beatles' self-titled double LP, released in the fall of '68. It stands as the only double LP by the Beatles. Of course, dubbed the White Album. It's often regarded as one of the 10 all-time greatest albums lists. It's always, in the top 10, top 5. Among other praise, Helter Skelter is widely cited as the song that started heavy metal. We've talked about it before on this channel. There's no doubt that the White Album and Helter Skelter deeply influenced music fans from all circles of life, even the souls of the demented. The most infamous adopter of the music of the White Album was notorious cult leader Charles Manson. The name Manson, it immediately evokes just images of evil, with Manson being the leader of a family of disenfranchised hippies who were responsible for arguably the most terrifying murders in American history. The Tate LaBianca murders of the summer of 1969. Now, the White Album became a constant soundtrack for the Manson family as they dissected what they perceived as hidden meaning in the songs and how they all fit together into a blood-soaked illustration that Manson embraced as gospel for what they deemed their social revolution. Tex Watson, who was the evil disciple that carried out Manson's instructions to commit the brutal murders, claimed that Manson heard a connection between Piggies, the Sound Collage Revolution 9, and Helter Skelter from the White Album. Somehow those songs were the ones that Charles Manson was obsessed with.
And for all the little piggies, life is getting worse.
Helter Skelter was interpreted by Charles Manson as a message by the Beatles predicting a race war in the U.S., and he titled his vision of the uprising as Helter Skelter. Charles Manson believed that the Beatles symbolized the four angels from the Revelation 9 section of the Bible. That holy passage also it mentions locusts, which Manson glommed onto as another word for Beatles, and faces with the faces of men, but with the hair of women, comparing the scripture to the long hair of the four band members. Crazy interpretation that he came up with. The Manson family asserted that they sent telegrams, written letters, and made phone calls to England to invite the Beatles to unite with them for the imaginary race war, but those communiques, obviously didn't reach the band. The words "death to pigs" and "rise" were written in blood on the living room of the slain LaBiancas, while Helter Skelter was misspelled as scrawled in blood on the refrigerator door at the site of the Tate murders. Now, after Manson and the perpetrators were apprehended, it was discovered that Helter Skelter had also been written on a door found at the Spahn Ranch near the hills above Chatsworth, California, which was one of the Manson family's hideouts, apparently. Charles Manson's dream was to be a world-renowned singer. As many of you probably know, he befriended Beach Boy drummer Dennis Wilson, who introduced him to various record executives in L.A. One of them was Doris Day's son, Terry Melcher. Terry Melcher produced Byrds Records and very successful producer in the mid to late 60s, many others. Manson gave Melcher a demo tape of some of his original songs, which Melcher eventually dismissed as not having any commercial potential. Charles Manson felt used and betrayed by Melcher, and the rejection only fueled his anger against Hollywood celebrities and his further alienation from society. The fascination by Manson for the music of the Beatles became a project to keep his followers loyal. It led to being the name of the crusade for committing these horrendous murders. Unfortunately, the result of Manson's twisted translation of Helter Skelter permanently connects Paul McCartney's song in a way that was inspired by a children's slide to Charles Manson. It's very sad, very unfair. Manson's sick mind took the lyrics to the darkest place imaginable, something that all the Beatles were just truly sickened by, but there was nothing that they could do about it. Harrison called Manson and his followers sleaze. Ringo knew Roman Polanski, the husband of Sharon Tate and the father of her unborn baby, which made all the links to the music of the Beatles even more horrific to him. To Lennon, the lyrics of Helter Skelter were hardly meant to be listened to. It was just noise, is what he said. In the interview he did with Playboy magazine in 1980, John Lennon compared Manson's extreme vision to the people that came up with Paul is Dead controversy, or those that were convinced Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was a clever way of spelling out the initials for LSD and, dropping acid. The Paul is Dead urban legend, which I mentioned at the very beginning of this program, that began circulating about 1967, and it hit its peak around American college campuses in 1969, According to the conspiracy theory, McCartney died in a car crash, and to spare the public from grief, the surviving Beatles replaced him with the winner of a Paul McCartney lookalike contest, sometimes identified as William Campbell or Billy Shears.
So let me introduce to you the one and only Billy Shears.
Of course, afterwards, the band allegedly left messages in their music and album artwork to subliminally communicate the truth to their fans. I remember talking to my dad about this all the time. These include the 1968 song Glass Onion, in which Lennon sings, "Here's another clue for y'all, the walrus was Paul." And the cover photo of their album Abbey Road, in which McCartney is shown barefoot and walking out of step with his bandmates. And we've talked about a few of these things before, but the meaning of Helter Skelter is crystal clear to Paul McCartney, who has had to process all the ominous misinterpretations of the track and deal with the myth that the real McCartney is not living. Because of the dark side of pop culture consciousness and out of respect for the lives of the victims of the Manson family murders, Paul McCartney refused to play Helter Skelter for decades. After the turn of the century, Paul inserted Helter Skelter into the set list of a lot of his live shows. Despite the song's link to infamy, Helter Skelter gets a huge reaction when Paul plays it with his band, to the point where it's become a highlight of his shows. At the 53rd Grammy Awards in 2011, the version of Helter Skelter from McCartney's live album Good Evening New York City that was recorded during the Summer Live 09 tour won in the category of Best Solo Rock Vocal Performance. Of course, there have been many, many notable covers of Helter Skelter, including versions by Aerosmith, Motley Crue, Oasis, Rob Zombie, Susie and the Banshees, Husker Du, Pat Benatar, and of course U2. Bono really put things in perspective when, right before U2 played their rendition of Helter Skelter, he proclaimed to the live audience,
"The song Charlie Manson stole from the Beatles. We stole it back."
Of course, from Rattle and Hum. Let's face it, when Paul McCartney set out to make a song that was pure noise, he more than accomplished his mission. Helter Skelter was a massive, unimaginable noise maker. It may have been intended simply to show that the Beatles could one-up The Who, but like everything the Fab Four touched, it became a phenomenon of pop consciousness. Even though it was a track that McCartney once called a ridiculous song, with a title that one could have thought of as rather cute, Helter Skelter was a stark example of the magnitude of Beatlemania and a deadly reminder of the dangers of cultism. How people can take a song and use it for good or bad, even though the original intention was pure. To me, though, Helter Skelter, it stands as an example of the incredible versatility of its composer, Paul McCartney. I'm not going to give it any credence to the Charles Manson stuff. Paul McCartney is a musical genius who can write something as brilliantly deep and melancholy as Yesterday. You know, a ballad that has become one of the most interpreted songs ever. I think it's the most covered song of all time.
All my troubles seem so far away.
And then you can turn around and almost single-handedly birth heavy metal with the loud and exciting Helter Skelter. And then just a year before that, he conceived of what many consider to be the greatest album ever created in Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. It was really Paul's concept. The most successful songwriter of all time is Paul McCartney, with a combined 29 number one hits between his solo and Beatles credits. And what a performer. You know, when I took my dad to see Paul McCartney in concert, it was just one of the fondest life memories I've ever had, because he's my dad's all-time favorite. As many of you know, my father, he raised me on the Beatles and Paul McCartney. My dad and I felt every one of those 37 songs that he performed that night, from All My Loving, which is the song my dad saw the Beatles play on the Ed Sullivan Show in '64 when he was a mere 10 years old. And it's the song that started his lifelong love of music, which he passed on to me. To to Paul's beautiful tribute to John that he performed here today. That's actually the song that I sung at my dad's funeral.
Here today.
And then after a blazing fireworks show when Paul rocked Live and Let Die, after playing 35 songs, Paul again lit up the stadium with a rousing balls-to-the-wall version of Helter Skelter, not missing a beat or any of his high notes. And he ended on the Sgt. Pepper reprise and, of course, the end, the final cut from Abbey Road. And though I'd never really seen my dad cry, I saw some tears that night at that wonderful concert. And here's the thing. Even though an evil man tried to steal Paul's hard rock manifesto, the light always prevails. And as four lads from Liverpool sung so many years ago, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And nobody can take that away. Leave us a comment about this Beatles hard rock masterpiece. What are your memories of this song and Paul's compositions? What are your thoughts on Paul? Who's your favorite Beatle? Let's have a Beatles discussion below. Let us know in the comments. If you dig our content, make sure to subscribe so that you never miss out on our videos. We'd love to have you as part of our community. Check us out on Patreon. Check out our new merch, including our Vintage Years collection. All these things help us keep the music alive, and that's the goal. Until next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friends. Talk soon.